Hello there.
Yeah, I know exactly what you're talking about.
Yeah. Okay, so we get them freeing the guards, leaving in the ship. They fly out. There we go. Okay, and then we meet. We get. Okay, so we're at the bit where they're flying out from the planet towards the blockade. And there are definitely some criticisms that are brought up concerning this sequence. So I think this would be a good bit that we can go through and try and break down.
So I haven't personally heard a ton of gripes about this
Mm.
specific sequence.
Well, I never used
What
to
are a
hear
few
them.
of the ones?
So I've never really had a problem with it. I've never really heard them. But when I've listened to those couple of EFAPs and when I was on the last couple of streams with Anomaly, some of the things that they were responding to, because I think both of those ones had the Phantom Menace as topics in them. So they're saying that if the Naboo Royal Starship is flying up from the planet towards the blockade, why would the blockade try and shoot it down if they know the Queen is on it? Because they need the Queen to sign the treaty. And to that, I would say they don't know the Queen is on it. To them, it would just be a ship trying to leave. And if they don't shoot it, then it's going to escape. And then what's the point of the
Well,
blockade?
exactly. It could jeopardize everything they're doing there.
Yeah.
So I think panic is the correct
Mm.
response to a ship trying to flee the
Yeah.
system.
Absolutely. I think another one of the things that one of them brought up, I can't remember exactly who, was that you're leaving the planet. Why do you fly straight towards the blockade? And although this is never really mentioned in any of the saga films. You can kind of insinuate it. It hints at it, but it never outright explores it. That it's probably all to do with hyperspace lanes, essentially, and that you can picture planets as like bus stops along a road. The hyperspace lanes sort of follow set routes, so it will go
Exactly.
towards a planet and away from a planet, and you can only travel along those routes. So for the blockade, there'd probably be two blockades we just can't see on the other side of the planet, and they'll probably be blocking the entrance and exits to essentially where the hyperspace lanes are. I think I saw this in a video from Eckhart's Ladder or something. I can't remember. It was a while ago. Which is often why when you see ships return to planets and stuff, they almost always return in the same place. Like you'll see them return towards the same area rather than somewhere different around the planet, which is one of the things that maybe could have been explored in the films, but I don't think it would really have helped. I think that's good for third-party material. So in this instance, it's fine within the context of the movie, but if you want to know more about exactly why the trade blockade is where it is and stuff like that, then you can look for books and stuff that will explain that. It's still it doesn't really affect the plot too much, if you know what I mean.
No, besides they acknowledge getting attacked. I feel like
Yeah.
since no one is surprised in the following scenes. I feel like the characters basically it was premeditated. Like they understood what was going to happen as soon as they tried to leave the system,
Hmm.
and they were taking action accordingly in the next scene when R2 is repairing the ship.
Yeah, it wasn't a surprise that they were being shot at, that they had to go through the blockade. That seemed pretty, um, like they seemed like they were. That's what they were trying to do anyway. That they knew they had to go through it. So, I think this is the first time that we see shield generators being used. I might be wrong. Do we see? I mean, they're talked about in
I think
the
this is the
original
first time we
trilogy.
see them, but they're
Yeah,
definitely talked about.
yeah,
I
they're
can
definitely.
almost recite the exact line where
Yeah,
Han specifically talks about
yeah,
them in the OT.
yeah. So like in the OT, they're talked about, but they don't really seem to have any effect or really do anything, which is basically just because of the time period they were made, they couldn't really show it very easily. Um, but once you get to these films, and especially when you see the Naboo starfighter land in the hangar of the control ship, and you see like the sort of the oomph around it when it powers up, like the little
Yeah.
wobbly stuff. I think that's the first time we see like actual ship shields working. Um, which yeah, and I can totally buy the fact that smaller like ship blaster fire would bounce off that, but huge big turbo laser cannons like the ones on the control ships could penetrate through that shield. That's totally feasible.
Well, it seems like common sense because
Mm.
in the real world, that's how it works. The more powerful something is,
Well,
the more
exactly.
likelihood it will have of breaking it. So I
Yeah,
think it's plausible.
yeah. Okay, and then we've got I've got the droids going up to fix the shield generator, which would be a good point to talk about R2. Um, and some of the things I've heard about this is that it's very contrived that the droid that's on the ship and fixes it happens to be R2D2. Which, if you're watching these films in the order that they came out, like you're already familiar with R2, and you go, "Oh, that's R2. Why is he here?" And oh, R2 just happens to be the one that fixes it, and I can see why that would um, look like a problem in certain people's eyes. But watching the films in order alleviates pretty much all of those criticisms. The same for 3PO, like being built by Anakin and stuff like that, because it's essentially one continuous story. Like this is where R2 started off. He was just a humble droid, and then all of the events throughout the next like 5 movies are just logical steps in that story. And go like he ends up on the Tantive 4, and then that's where it starts off in A New Hope. There's no problem there with the actual storytelling if you watch it in chronological order. Um, so I think that's my response to people who say
I
that.
I honestly thought it was extremely clever and perfectly done how he was
Mm,
introduced.
yeah,
It
I
was kind
loved
of
it.
cool seeing that R2 out of all these droids obviously um had proven that he excels at his job. So then isn't there a line in there where Captain Panaka is
He's an
like that
exceptionally
little
well put together
he's
little
like
droid or something.
yeah, he acknowledges him
Yeah.
after he gets back on the ship and he's like
Mm,
that little droid did it. The shields are back on.
yeah.
And it's kind of like, well, the legend of one of the most kick-ass underwhelming droids begins right there.
Yeah, no, it's great, and I think the fact that he is like the one to survive out of all of those droids and be the one to like save the day, and he's a very well put together little droid. I think gives him some actual credence going into the future films, and that like this isn't just like a normal astromech. He has just something a little bit special about him, which is why
Yeah, he's not just a
yeah,
prop.
yeah, he's not just a prop. He's not just. He has a bit of personality. He's pretty good at his job, which is why he's good at what he does. in the later films. So I think it sets it up really well.
It's honestly kind of cool to see the droids grow with the characters in the prequels. I
Mm,
feel like we see them kind of evolve. And since George said that the saga was through the storytelling perspective of the droids, uh,
mm.
um, or maybe that was the original
Yeah,
idea
that
he
is the
had.
original trilogy.
He's had
Yeah.
yeah, he's had a few.
Mm,
Um, but I think it's really cool to always have those characters around. And I
mm,
also
yeah.
like what we're gonna get to soon, how 3PO and him meet on Tatooine.
I love that. I love the little meeting between the two. Um, I was about to say something about that, and I've, I've, I've lost it again. Uh, what was it? Oh, it can't have been that important. Oh well. Um, it might come back to me. So there we go. R2 goes up. He fixes the shield generator. He does a good job, and they fly nice and close into the control ship, which is good flying, good tactics, so they can avoid the turbo lasers very well. Um, Rather than just flying by, they try and dodge around and getting close. So it's some good tactical flying there. And then I think this is the bit where they were talking about in EFAP that you never see them jump to hyperspace. Um, so I just want to double check. Uh, yeah, so it doesn't show them jumping to hyperspace, but one of the things I'll say is that in the original trilogy, it doesn't always show them jumping to hyperspace. Um, so, you know, if you're gonna point that out as a problem, then the OT suffers from that too.
And the OT
Um,
doesn't always acknowledge how much time is passing while they're traveling either. So
no,
there's a lot of
exactly.
different
Yeah,
issues with that
well,
in the OT as well. But
yeah.
once again, none of them are detrimental to the story.
No,
Everything can be figured
it's
out pretty
it,
easy.
the mechanics of it are sketchy at best because it's a very difficult concept to actually try and fit into a world and have it work. You know, because the premise of light speed travel, it's a pretty simple concept, but actually having that so it doesn't break the physics of the universe that they're in is very very difficult. Because if it was in reality, even light speed travel would take you hundreds of thousands of years to even get between planets. So it's clearly there's clearly something else at work. I know that it might be in Legends that hyperspace is kind of like the hyperspace lanes are kind of like jumping through almost into another partial dimension that whatever it is, which is an okay explanation, but I don't think it's a really great explanation, um, considering it's still called just like light speed. Um, so I think it could be. I think it does need explaining, but maybe not in the movies itself.
Exactly. And I think as it's used in the movies, it is fine for the time being. But I think um when you emphasize that part of the universe, it can get detrimental. Like in The Rise of Skywalker where we see
The
Poe,
the light speed
what was he
skipping.
doing? He was skipping. When you put emphasis on something that's already touchy, it does kind of start to become a little bit of a problem.
Yeah, so like in the originals, it was very much just sort of seen as, this is how in their universe ships get from one place to another quickly. That's all you needed to know. You didn't need to know the ins and outs and stuff like that. We got a little bit of why it's dangerous, why you need to like plot a course, but other than that, it was pretty much left alone for the rest of the trilogy. And then again in the prequels, I don't think it's even touched on at all, really. Apart from perhaps like hyperspace lanes. Do they talk about hyperspace lanes in the prequels, or is that only really in the Clone Wars?
I'm not I'm not too sure if they talk
Mm,
about it or acknowledge it specifically,
mm.
but
But either way,
I do definitely know they um they hint at it very strongly.
Yeah, they hint at it very strongly, but he really tries his best not to explore like hyperspace and stuff like that because it is sketchy and one of those things that I know this is going to sound bad, but that just don't think about it and it all makes sense, you know. But it's when you start focusing in on that, especially with like the hyperspace RAM and the lightspeed skipping. That's quite some new stuff you're bringing into the story there, putting a lot of focus and emphasis on that hyperspace, and that's where things really start to fall apart. Because people say,
Exactly, because then you
yeah.
start. Oh, you go ahead.
Oh, I was going to say, because that's where you start questioning stuff. Because like in the originals, like lightspeed ramming, it may have been possible. Like you could, it would be a logical thing that could happen. But since we never see it, it's never like even hinted at. You sort of subconsciously assume that it's probably just not a thing that can happen. That there's no reason to wonder why it should happen. But once you start exploring those aspects, that's where the ground really starts to fall out from under your feet, and it gets really sketchy.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
And then I think we're on the part where Qui-Gon is looking at the star chart, and one of the captains is saying that they don't have enough fuel to make it to Coruscant. So Obi-Wan points out that Tatooine is the nearest planet.
Mm-hmm. And that's one of the things I'd never really sort of thought when I was younger that Naboo would be like near Tatooine in the Outer Rim. Because Naboo is clearly very like a civilized society. It seems very fairly wealthy. I wouldn't have expected it to be out in the Outer Rim. That was something I never really thought of when I was younger. But looking at it now, I mean, it's fine. But it's just not something I would have expected, given what we know about like
Yeah,
Tatooine
I
and
don't think it
Hut
poses any
space.
problems.
No. Um, and like by closest planet, that's still probably a long, long way away. It's not
Oh,
like
definitely.
it's not like Tatooine is in the same solar system as Naboo or anything. It's still a long, long way away, but it's just probably one of the nearer
Plus,
planets.
I think he specifies it is one of the closest planets where the Trade Federation has no
Has
presence. So,
yeah, I
so I
think
think there's other planets that may be orbiting closer.
yeah, absolutely. I don't know whether you remember the 2008 Clone Wars Republic Heroes game. Did you ever play that?
Um,
It
I'm
was
trying to remember.
it was a weird game. It was kind of just like a third person, semi third person shooter where you could also play as like the Jedi in the Clone Wars, and it essentially followed like the plot of like a couple of episodes of the Clone Wars that were never released. They're pretty cool episodes, but I know the finale of that you have to go to a planet in the Naboo system that isn't Naboo, and that is clearly controlled by the separatists and like the Trade Federation. So they may well have actually like Naboo is like kind of like the capital planet, if you like, of that solar system. But I wouldn't be surprised if even later on the Trade Federation set up like outposts and facilities and stuff on nearby planets. Like that wouldn't surprise me. Anyway, I was just going. That's what I remember from that game, and the fact that there definitely are other planets in the Naboo system.
Unfortunately, once again, that game was probably made to not be canon anymore.
Which is unfortunate, actually, because I really like that game. I mean, it's essentially just some episodes of the Clone Wars. But yeah, it's a shame. Got to see some really good
I thought
campaign in
all
that.
the
Hmm.
I thought all the games LucasArts put out were pretty stellar.
Yeah, go back to the golden era of Star Wars games. I mean, just look at like 2005. Look at all the fantastic iconic games that came out in that 1 year.
And they're still replayable.
Exactly, and like we've had less than that since 2012. Anyway, we're getting a bit off topic.
Yeah.
Yeah,
That's a different.
that's a whole different thing. Anyway, so uh, we're then back. Okay, so this is the introduction of Darth Maul, I think. Now.
Oh, before that,
Oh,
I like they had a subtle call to the Huts when they're in the
yeah,
ship.
yeah.
He's talking about how Tatooine is controlled by the Huts, and
Mhm.
then to explain why they're going to Tatooine specifically, after Captain Panaka is panicking about the system being controlled by the Huts,
Mm.
Qui-Gon says it would be no different if we landed on a planet that's controlled by the Federation, except the difference is the Huts aren't looking for us.
Yeah,
So
and
that's how he
that's
convinces him to land there.
yeah, yeah. That's good. Um, okay, so now we've got to the Darth Maul bit. Um, so this is where the viceroys are essentially trying to tell Sidious that the Queen has escaped. They've lost her, and this is where Sidious's plan is sort of breaking down a bit. He's sort of gonna have to start trying to fix his own plan because
Yeah,
that
Plan B is commencing.
yeah, this is the beginning of Palpatine's Plan B, um, which is of course the point at which he then brings in Maul to go and hunt her down. Essentially, I can't remember. I don't know what. I can't remember if it's said in the film. Is Maul's directive to go and kill Padme, or is it to go and capture Padme?
Um, I'm not entirely sure,
No, I can't
but in
remember.
this scene, I don't think it's acknowledged.
I don't think it's acknowledged here. Um, I have a vague recollection that Qui-Gon might mention it later on after he fights Maul on Tatooine, but I can't remember it off the top of my head. But we'll come to
Oh
that
well,
if that comes up.
Sidious says in that scene with Maul, "This is my apprentice.
Mm.
Maul will find your lost ship."
Mm.
So,
So he's essentially
I
tracking it down more than anything.
yeah, yeah, he's just locating it at the very least.
Mm. And this is where some tracking fobs would be useful. Um, which yeah, that's why I have such a huge problem with the tracking fobs in the Mandalorian.
Yeah, me too. It kind of deteriorates the whole point of why bounty hunters get paid so much.
Exactly. And I was always surprised that that was even a thing in the Mandalorian, considering how much bounty hunters were focused on by Filoni and stuff in the Clone Wars. And he did a pretty good job at showing their skills and why they were good at being bounty hunters in the show. So then I don't know whether the tracking fobs were his idea or Favreau's or what went on there, but it just seemed an
It
odd
just
choice.
Yeah, it felt lazy to quickly explain without use of much lore at all to casual fans how the Mandalorian was going to be able to find Baby Yoda.
Yeah, yeah, totally agree. Um, so yeah, also great entrance by Darth Maul, just sort of coming into frame and then just looking menacing. Great introduction.
And then the music, isn't there small music behind him, a music
Yeah,
cue?
yeah, sort of.
It gives me chills.
Yeah. um. So no flaws here. It's pretty great. Oh, and then this is getting out of hand. Now there are two of them. Okay, and then we see we're back at the cruiser, and we're not in hyperspace, and they're still flying. Has the hyperdrive been damaged so that they can't use it, or is it just like slightly damaged at this point?
I think it's damaged to the point where they can't use it.
Yeah. So this I think is where the main problem that got brought up, where that lies in that if they're going to Tatooine, without a hyperdrive, then that's a long way. That would take a long time to get there.
I
I
can't
think,
remember if they said there just wasn't enough. Like,
yeah, this is the thing. I can't remember whether they said like there's not enough. Like, do they have no hyperdrive, or have they used most of like the hyperdrive or something? I can't remember exactly what they say.
I think as of right now, um, to people who critique this part, we can give it to them.
Hmm.
This might have not been explained the
I
best.
I think this could have been done better. So what am I going to class this as? This is going to be the hyper space between Naboo and Tatooine. Um, so at the moment we are what 20? No, I'm nearly half an hour into the film, and so far we've had, I think, two things that we are classing as actual like problems that we could consider to be genuine problems, which are this
Yeah, I think
and the
two or
Force
three.
realm.
I think a few of them are a little
I may have just forgotten to write one or two of them down. But yeah, there's not many.
they
It's
they've
pretty
all
tight.
been pretty sketchy too. Like they're not indefinite flaws per
No,
se.
you could definitely for both of them. You could definitely there's definitely a rationale that you could use, but I think to try and explain that using what we see in the film, I think it is stretching. I think it's giving it a bit too much credit, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
I think it's just trying a little bit too hard to explain it without being given enough information by the film itself.
Yeah, like it would have been really easy to include a line in there somewhere that said like oh, the hyperdrive is just stable enough to get us to and then their destination,
Yeah,
or
exactly. Or I mean,
something along
they
those
could have
lines.
they could have done a scene perhaps a bit like the Clone Wars finale, where they're in hyperspace, but then they fall out of hyperspace. I don't know, it's like the hyperdrive stops working or something, and it pulls them out of hyperspace, and they have to then make their way to Tatooine like that. I don't know. It's a possibility, but yeah. On the whole, it can be you can rationalize it. You can try and explain it, but I think it's just a little bit too much work for the viewer to do, for it not to be a problem.
I think afterwards, the next few scenes, they are just they're basically just conversating after they've landed, and Padme thanks R2 for saving them.
Yeah, and I like that. I like that scene because the fact that she is R2 is like Padme's droid, it does set up like a little close connection between the two, and why she would sort of really like R2, and hence why she gives him to Anakin as the wedding gift, and I think it sets up like the two characters really nicely, gives them a really good introduction to each other.
Definitely.
Hmm.
And then I think Qui-Gon and Captain Panaka are having a squall between um, if it's safe or not for the Queen to leave the ship.
Yeah,
And Qui-Gon says, "You must trust my judgment."
yeah. Um, and I guess it's a fairly decent point to start talking about like Qui-Gon and like the will of the Force. That nothing happens by accident. That they are there for a reason. That the Force guides them there. And whether or not that could be considered to be contrivance within the universe or not. I mean, in universe, it's not contrivance, because it's the Force. Um, you know, the Force works in mysterious ways. Um, but from a writing standpoint, it's whether that could be considered to be lazy writing or not, or contrivance.
Well, I would
The,
think
hmm,
I would think to a degree, it's lazy writing, but
Mm.
then you also have to remember that it's already kind of been set up in Qui-Gon's character so far in the short time of the movie we've seen him,
Yeah,
that he is definitely not a Jedi who plays by the rules, and he listens solely to the Force.
sure.
And he has a very strong faith in the Force.
Yeah.
And this is also backed up later in the movie, calling back to the scenes on Tatooine and his reasoning for being there after we find out that he wasn't allowed on the council, and we find out that he went against the council's suggestions or
Yeah.
what they told him to do.
Mm. And I think if we didn't have Qui-Gon and his stuff about the Force working, it's the will of the Force. If that wasn't in the film, if it didn't have any of that, I think we could certainly consider the fact that they land on this random planet essentially, and then meet Anakin Skywalker and all of this, and all the events transpire in the same way. I think that certainly could be considered to be contrivance and poor writing. But the fact that the script and the story acknowledges that and does its job to like actually explain that, I think kind of helps that out a bit.
Yeah. But then again, you also got to think back to something like A New Hope, and
Exactly, yeah.
it's kind of crazy the odd coincidences of location that happen
Hmm.
in that
I mean,
movie.
do we know
Like,
why the blockade runner is flying past Tatooine at that point? Like, there's no real reason, is there? I mean, unless it's flying past there because Leia knows that Obi-Wan Kenobi is on Tatooine and she's trying to get the message
but
to him.
that's the
But
thing, we don't
we
we
don't
don't know
know.
that.
There's not enough work done there, and that does seem very contrived. And the fact that, I mean, at the time, the fact that Luke is also there seemed very contrived. But I mean, with the prequels, the fact that
Yeah,
Obi-Wan,
now this.
that's given some added context, which is okay. But especially at the time, yeah, there's certainly a lot
And
of
then if you want to
problems.
get really, really picky with that scene, it's not like it's not like they have to be really stingy about how much ammo they use. So it's kind of weird that just in case something was on that escape pod, he would
Mm.
tell them to not fire at it
Yeah, it's odd
when
that
it
they would
just.
think that it's launched accidentally or whatever.
I think the will of the force to explain a few coincidences is not the best writing, but it's somewhat believable in a lot of instances, especially surrounding the Skywalkers in the story of Star Wars.
Mm.
I
Yeah.
don't feel like it's too outlandish, but it's definitely contrived to a point.
Yeah, I think the key part there is it's contrived to a point. It's not just lazy, right? At least work is done to kind of explain it, and it, within the universe as to why it's happening. It's not just sort of, oh, this is happening now. Oh, this is happening now. That's convenient. Um, so yeah, I think it's a little bit of a problem, but not a problem within the universe.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I would agree.
So Qui-Gon then leaves to go and get this new hyperdrive, and he takes Jar Jar and R2, which I can't remember who it was, but somebody in the comments on one of the other podcasts um, said why he took R2, and I think he said there was a line that Qui-Gon says that the technical readouts or whatever it is for the hyperdrive are stored in R2, and that's why he's taking him. So if he finds a junk trader, he can show them what he wants, which is totally fine. That's all right. And the fact that he feels responsible for Jar Jar, and he takes him with him. I don't think he'd want to like leave Jar Jar with everybody on the ship. I think that he knows that Jar Jar would like irritate the people there, so he's sort of taken him with him to keep an eye on
Especially
him.
Obi-Wan.
Yeah. Especially as Obi-Wan clearly already thinks of Jar Jar as a pathetic life form. So yeah, I've got no problems there. And then we've got Padme as the handmaiden, and I think at this point, I think Qui-Gon has sort of, or at least started to clock on to the fact that they're using decoys and that this might be the Queen.
Well, yeah, because
Yeah,
Padme so bluntly says, "No, I want to go."
yeah,
She acts pretty entitled while doing it.
yeah. I mean, she doesn't exactly act like a handmaiden, like a servant.
No.
No. I'm looking at this screenshot of Qui-Gon. The expression on his face is just like, hmm. So yeah, I
Well,
think,
yeah. Remember when Padme reveals herself to Boss Nass later in the film,
and Qui-Gon
and
and everyone, they just exchange like a,
yeah, they just kind of grin at each other,
yeah. So
like a
Qui-Gon
bet had been
clearly knew.
settled.
And then
So, are they approaching the plaza?
yeah, so they've
And
so then we get the infamous Jar Jar stepping in poo joke. Um, which, I mean, to be honest, I have no problem with it. I thought it's kind of funny, but I can totally see why people didn't like it. It is quite
definitely,
childish, and I think that is down to personal preference. I wouldn't say that's an objective flaw with the film. I would just say that, what someone finds funny is not necessarily what another person finds funny. Um,
I also think that by including something as innocent like that, you got to remember this is also a few decades after the originals have been made,
hmm,
and George is still trying to appeal to new people. He wants
yeah,
kids to get into
he's
Star
not.
Wars again.
Yeah,
So a harmless joke that might not land with older viewers here and there isn't very harmful to the movie at all.
no, exactly. He's not making these films for the people who grew up with the originals. I mean, that's he's obviously got those sort of people in mind, um, which is why there's quite a lot of nostalgia actually in these films, like going back to Tatooine and the characters and stuff like that. So there's clearly
And R2.
some, and R2 and 3PO. There's clearly some credence towards that, but obviously he wants to try and get a new generation involved as well. Um, and one of the things I would mainly say about this is that, look, if you don't like it, it lasts 2 seconds or less. So just like don't get too bogged down in it.
Or just hit like a 10-second skip button on your remote.
Yeah, if you
It's
really,
not.
if it really bothers you that much,
Yeah, if you
yeah,
if you like can't help but I don't know, make a fist at it because you're that angry at a joke, I guess fast forward it.
yeah. And I think if you're that worried about one couple of second joke about a character stepping in some poo, I think I think
I
that's
no
going.
longer think the movie is the problem.
Yeah, exactly. Um, so is Watto's junk shop the first place they visit?
I
Because they're walking
think
through the
they look
market.
around a little bit,
They look around a little bit. Oh, Qui-Gon
and
says
then
we'll look for one of the smaller dealers because he's clearly in the plaza where there's like stalls and traders all around him. But he wants to look for, like, he's not going into like a big, like, he's not going into the equivalent of like Walmart or something to go and buy a new hyperdrive. He wants to
yeah,
kind of do it, slightly on the, maybe not the black market, but yeah, he doesn't want to go and make himself known in a big establishment.
yeah, and I think Watto kind of subtly, I mean, the salesman he acknowledges them first, and then Qui-Gon tells him what exactly he needs. Watto says they've got a lot of Nubian stuff.
Yeah, which surprised me, I guess. If the Nubian ships are like the Queen's ships, like the Naboo ships, I don't know whether Nubians are also found throughout the galaxy, because it sounds like they're a common type of ship, but they look pretty specific to Naboo and like their culture and stuff. So I don't know whether because like it's a what did you call it, a Nubian yacht or something? Their ship, or a Nubian cruiser, whatever it is.
Yeah, I
Mm,
think the official ship title for Padme ship is a J type 327 Nubian,
yeah.
but
So
I think they just call them Nubians.
yeah. So I think it doesn't appear to be it doesn't look particularly like a common ship, so you wouldn't expect it to be easy to find the parts. But if the hyperdrive is just a pretty standard hyperdrive within that ship, then I can totally buy that.
Yeah,
It's like if you may have a Ferrari, but it might have a pretty standard component, as like a Ford Fiesta or something at somewhere, in its build, which is not unreasonable. You know,
yeah.
I think it's just a little convenient that that he happens to have a lot of the parts that are needed. But it's fine. He's a junk trader. He probably gets them in all the time.
Plus, they sound like high profile
Yeah,
type of vehicles. So I
yeah,
would assume wealthy gangsters or whoever's on Tatooine, that type of crowd,
yeah. They
um,
probably want to
they might
trade them up.
be looking for
Mm,
something like that.
yeah,
It might be a
absolutely.
rarity.
Yeah.
So he might collect.
Okay, and then we get the introduction of Anakin.
And he's speaking a different language, I think, in the
Yeah,
first few lines.
yeah, yeah. So I like the fact that little Anakin, he's only like 9, but he still talks in alien languages. It shows that he's still pretty bright for his age. And again, I do like the humor between Qui-Gon and Jar Jar in this scene.
It's honestly hilarious in my opinion still.
It's just
I think it gets
it's the straight it's like the straightness of Qui-Gon, of Liam Neeson's delivery. He's like the straight man, and then you got Jar Jar, who's the sort of the funny one. It's a great comedic duo.
definitely.
Hmm. I mean, that's what you see in all classic, comedic duos, like Laurel and Hardy, and all those sort of comedy legends. It's always like the straight man who wants to get the other one to stop what he's doing, and the other one's just being silly. And I think it works really, really well.
Yeah, it definitely does. Especially when they're at like the table and Qui-Gon grabs his tongue.
Yeah, again, which is set up
That
in this scene with the tongue.
yeah. And then this is where okay, so it's about time we start acknowledging people's criticisms about the lines between Padme and
Ah,
Anakin.
yes. So, are you an angel? Um, Totally fine in my book. Um,
So
he's probably
I have
never
a
seen a
very
pretty
specific
girl.
defense for
Mm.
this.
Mm-hmm. Go
I'll
on.
let you go first,
Oh,
but
no, no, no. Go on. I was probably going to say something pretty
um
generic.
so I want people who criticize the scene to really think about I mean, of course, their memory from childhood might not be as sharp, but think about kids in our world
Mm.
generally.
Yeah.
When they say things, it's usually pretty genuine because they don't understand the undertones of what everything means
Mm.
in society. So anything that comes out of a child's mouth is usually pretty it's pretty blunt, and sometimes it's either in a good way or a negative way, I guess.
Mm.
And saying "Are you an angel?" seems like he's so innocently like in awe at how beautiful she is, and he even elaborates on it, saying, I heard the deep space pilots talk about them." Like he's genuinely asking, and it's kind of a charming, childlike thing for him to say, in my opinion.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I totally agree. Um, I think that of somebody of his age, that sort of childlike innocence is clearly what George wanted to get from Jake Lloyd here. He's just a lovely little boy, innocent in the ways of the world, which is great, showing what he was like and what we know he'll, eventually become. I think it's great contrast between the two.
And I think it's also cool that very, very subtly in a few of the scenes on Tatooine, you see a little bit of Anakin's anger in a sense. And
Hmm.
I think it's just because naturally being a slave his entire life,
Hmm. Well,
he's
exactly.
built
Yeah.
up a certain level of resentment.
Well, that line about like I'm a person and my name is Anakin. That that's quite a confronting line that he has. He's quite serious about that. It does like rile him up a little bit. So it does go to show that although he is this like nice little innocent boy, he's not totally without any form of sort of anger, or um, he can't be angered. So it's good setup for then eventually Attack of the Clones, where that goes a little bit more extreme.
Exactly. And people say, well, you can see the dark side in him right here. It's ridiculous that they couldn't prevent um, him from turning, even though there were so many obvious signs. And my response to that would be, I don't think that would have mattered if he was force sensitive or not. I
Mm.
think Anakin and his character, and the nature of his character, is to defend himself, especially when he's got a lot of pride.
Mm. Yeah. No, absolutely. Um, and then Padme, um, sort of acts very sort of oh, you're a cute little boy. Um, which again, I don't know why people have such a problem with it. She's not flirting with him. That's stupid.
Yeah, I think it's honestly creepy how people even look at it that way,
Yeah, like
just
that's
because
clearly not the
way
intention of
farther
the
down
scene.
into the future.
Yeah, I think it says probably a bit more about the people interpreting it that way than the scene itself, what George intended.
Exactly, it's entirely innocent, and I I think it's completely normal,
Hmm.
but apparently people didn't perceive it that way.
But it does start, this friendship between them. She clearly thinks, oh, he's a nice little boy. Anakin is, he thinks she's hot. Um,
Yeah,
but
I mean, he's
it
never.
exactly. He's probably never seen someone like this before. That's a young woman who's pretty, and well, he clearly hasn't. 'Cause he thinks she's an angel. So
Yeah,
it's a
he's
new
used to
thing for
seeing
him.
ugly Rhodians like Greedo.
And like that old woman cleaning the pots and pans or whatever
Yeah,
whatever it is. That's what he's used to. But no,
and
I like
then
this introduction to the two.
he says, "Hit it on the nose." So, I
Hmm.
mean, we already get a little bit of a taste on how smart he is when dealing with building stuff, and
Yeah. I also like the line where he's sort of saying that, like Padme says, "How do you know so much?" And he says he listens to like the junk traders as they come and go, and all of this. And it's a really good, simple, and effective way to sort of like explain why he does know so much about like the situations he's in, and why he's so good at like essentially engineering, and why he's quite streetwise and all of this, and quite savvy, um, in just a single line. I think it's pretty well explained.
of course, and I think him having the Force amplifies how quickly he learns it a
Yeah,
little bit.
yeah,
And I think that's
definitely.
completely justifiable because since anyone can learn how to do this stuff, it makes total sense for someone who is extremely force sensitive to pick it up a little bit quicker.
Yeah, absolutely, totally. Uh,
And then this is the exchange between Watto and Qui-Gon.
yeah, which I do like. Um, I don't know whether you've ever noticed this, but I think one of the just a little tidbit in the background, one of the little spaceships in the background is actually one of the pods from 2001: A Space Odyssey.
Oh,
So
really?
one of the little, I think it looks like a pod with like two little robot arms sticking out of it. It's just like one of the escape pods from the ship in 2001.
That's cool.
It's really
I
cool.
love
Well,
little cameos like that.
it's like the little the ETs in the Senate as well.
Yeah, yeah, that's one of my favorite ones.
I like all these little nods to other films. It's good. Okay, so with the scene with Watto, this is where we get the stuff about the Republic credits and why couldn't Qui-Gon have just sort of gone to, someone who could exchange the Republic credits for whatever Watto wants. Um, and I think there is space for valid criticism there, but I guess it can also be fairly easily explained as well.
Well, yeah, so I think that's one of the ones where we could give it to people who have a
Yeah,
problem with it, that it is a somewhat justifiable problem.
yeah,
But then again, we also have to remember one of their main goals or reasons for coming to Tatooine in general was to not draw attention. So you'd think the more people Qui-Gon approaches or
yeah. He wants to keep a low
asks
profile.
about,
Hmm.
yeah,
And one of the things that I would draw a parallel to for people who don't still quite understand this scene is what you've got to imagine is that the Republic is kind of like the EU. They use a standard currency like the euro. It's like obviously back in the day, all the different countries in Europe had their own currencies, but once they all joined the EU, um, they all adopted the euro pretty much, apart from Britain. And it all became a standard currency across the continent, which I guess is kind of what happens with the Republic. Each planet has its own currency, but then when they become part of the Republic, it tends to be Republic credits that they trade in. So somewhere that's not in the Republic, that's out in the Outer Rim, it's like going to, I don't know, some third world country. I don't know, it's like going to Haiti or somewhere and trying to use a euro to buy stuff. It's just not gonna work. And especially if you're in like a little village out in the middle of nowhere, you're probably not gonna find many places where you can exchange your money. Even at
yeah,
a trading outpost, it's. Hmm.
you've got to remember that like even Anakin's mother openly expresses her displeasure with how the Republic and the Senate and pretty much everyone has handled the crime and all the bad things that are happening
Hmm.
in the outer rim. So there is nothing there's nothing they can really do about it. And one inference that I could make is that maybe if Qui-Gon were to keep asking around for an exchange in currency, someone could take it the wrong way and ask, well, why do you have Republic credits?
Yeah, yeah. Who are you
Like,
with all
who are
your?
you?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
So yeah, that could. I'd never really thought about it that way, but that could cause him a lot of problems. Yeah. Um, so I think criticism of this is somewhat valid, but I think if you look at the context of the world that we already know, the context of where they are, who these people are, I think that it's justifiable as to like why he can't use Republic credits, why he can't exchange them. Because I think there was also talk that why didn't Qui-Gon buy something with his credits from someone who did who would accept them. But if this is Hut space, why would they accept them? It's not the correct
exactly.
currency. So it's pointless money. It's essentially worthless. So he's not going to be able to trade with anybody really because they're not going to accept it. Just like Watto.
And then I think do they keep walking here through the street market?
Yeah, I think so. And you've got the mind trick, um, of course, as well, which Watto seems to sort of assume that Qui-Gon. I don't think he thinks Qui-Gon is a Jedi. I think he's just like thinking that Qui-Gon is pretending to be a Jedi or something like that. Because he's not saying, "Oh, you're a Jedi." mind tricks don't work on me. He says, "What do you think? You're some kind of Jedi?" Because he doesn't know Qui-Gon is a Jedi. He's like, mind tricks are done by Jedi. This guy might be a Jedi. I don't know, but
He takes it as kind of a
yeah,
laughable joke.
yeah, whatever he's doing, it's not gonna work.
I like how it also elaborates on mind tricking in general in the
Mm,
Star Wars universe, how it's not some overpowered ability where the Jedi can manipulate anyone they want at any time
mm,
for any will that
yeah,
they might have.
and that was
It's
sort
a
of
limited ability.
yeah, that was sort of explored, I think, in Return of the Jedi, because like Luke mind tricks Bib Fortuna into taking him to see Jabba, and Jabba's like, "You weak-minded fool,"
Yeah,
clearly mind tricks wouldn't work on Jabba because he's a pretty smart guy, big crime boss, whatever. He's clearly not weak-minded, but I think this does a great job at sort of exploring that even more, expanding upon that.
definitely. And so it's this when Sebulba and Jar Jar
That's
get
right.
into
A fight.
and then
Um,
it kind of foreshadows the rivalry between Anakin and Sebulba when Anakin steps in. Once again, I think this is another place where the humor they used was very tasteful.
yeah,
It was this local kind of tough alien who took offense to what he thought was an insult from Jar Jar
yeah.
when really he was just being an idiot.
Well, yeah. Um, I think that could we argue that Anakin being the one to sort of come out and stop it is a little contrived? I would say it isn't, but I can see why some people might argue that. Um,
I could see it, but then again, you got to remember Anakin just met Jar Jar, so he obviously knows who he is, and
yeah,
especially if he knows who Sebulba is and he doesn't like him, I think no matter who it
exactly.
was, Anakin might have stepped in no matter
Well,
what.
yeah, exactly. If you've just met some really weird people in your shop and you've just left and seen them down the road being mugged, I think you'd want to go and help them out.
Yeah, it kind of gives you a taste of
Mm.
Anakin does have some type of motive to be good.
Yeah, yeah, essentially. Um, and I like how he sort of taunts Sebulba almost like an equal in the racing world, even though Sebulba was clearly sort of like a huge celebrity in pod racing, and Anakin's just like a little boy, but he just teases him and taunts him. It's a good sort of back and forth between the two.
It also sets up Anakin's arrogance in the later movies, so
Yeah.
I think it's pretty cool.
And the foreshadowing there from Sebulba about next time we race it will be the end of you, and it's of course the other way around. I like that.
Real quick, I know we're not there, but so we don't have to cover it later.
Hmm.
I've heard a lot of people criticize on the final lap of the pod race. People say that it looks very bad when Sebulba crashes. They say the mixture of practical effects and CGI right there
Hmm.
could not have been done worse.
Well, I think
I, to this day, think that it's almost indecisible whether if it's CGI or practical effects.
I
I
think
think they blend perfectly.
yeah, I think they look absolutely fantastic. I remember watching that one of those Corridor Crew VFX artists react videos about it, and they were sort of going through parts of the pod race, and they were showing like when it explodes. I think it flies and hits a rock and like explodes and then tumbles across the ground. The
Yes.
physics and the amount of animation and stuff involved, like just in that one sequence, was absolutely insane for the time. And to get it looking so good was just incredible for them to do at the time, and for it to still look good enough to this day that it's pretty indiscernible between the props that they used, like with the cockpit sliding across the desert. I mean, when you compare that and the shots of the pod racers flying, I mean, it's pretty indiscernible. It's in fact, I think one of the reasons it does look so good is what they're saying that they built the the track out of CGI. They built it in CGI, but what they did is they sent a couple of photographers out to the desert to like photograph those big rock arches and cliffs and stuff like that they wanted to use, and then essentially mapped those high resolution photographs onto the 3D geometry, which is why they look so crisp and realistic. And it's a fantastic effect. It works really, really well.
Definitely. I totally agree. I think that didn't you react to a video? I think that was one of your past live streams where someone was critiquing the shots in the prequels, and during the pod race they showed some of the best scenes while trying to critique it.
That's
And
right.
you guys thought like the editor had purposely put the good shots in there to make the guy who was
Yeah.
narrating sound like a complete idiot.
Yeah.
That was
Yeah.
funny.
I mean, especially since the pod race is one of really the only sort of fully CGI scenes in the entire film. I think it does a great job, and that's where I think why it works so well is because it is still quite restrained. It is a really good blend of practical effects with CGI being used to sort of enhance those that are already there, which is why I think it stands so well up against the rest of the film. 'Cause,
Definitely.
I think they did say they wanted to try doing it practically, but they just, it's impossible, because of physics to get the pod racers moving so precisely and accurately and make it look realistic. So it's good to know that they really did want to. But I think doing it the way they did, it looks absolutely fantastic. And it's
Definitely.
still one of my favourite sequences of the whole film.
I mean, the more and more I critique the Phantom Menace on my own time,
Mm.
I it's starting to become one of my all-time favorite movies. I
Mm.
just enjoy it, and I'm able to rewatch it no matter what.
Yeah, well, it's like I think I kind of have in the back of my mind that like Revenge of the Sith probably is and will always be the best of the prequels, even though Phantom Menace is my favourite. But every time I watch the Phantom Menace, sometimes I just sort of think, you know what? A lot of this is better than Revenge of the Sith. They're both on very even footings for me, and it sort of dips as to which one I think is better all the time.
Yeah, it's
It's
like on
fantastic.
an off day,
Mm.
the Phantom Menace could be your favorite, and then
Mm.
on another day, could be Revenge of the Sith.
Exactly, and that just goes to show how good they all are, really. There's no clear one that's like really bad out of all of the Lucas ones. They're all of them are still pretty gosh darn good.
And I think a lot of times, just to one last thing is I think a lot of times people really don't respect storytelling as much as the action sequences.
Mm.
I think a lot of people rate A New Hope specifically the worst out of the original trilogy because it has some of the least action, or when there is action, I've heard that people don't think it was done as well as it
Yeah.
is in later movies.
Mm.
And I think people just really underestimate the power of good storytelling
Yeah.
sometimes over
Absolutely.
action sequences.
I think as a movie like on its own, I think A New Hope is probably the best story wise because it is essentially just its own self-contained story. You can watch A New Hope without any of the other films, and it's still a good film, and it has a beginning, middle, and end, just as it was originally intended, which I think is a reason why its story still holds up so well today. Because it wasn't a sequel relying on other films, it wasn't a prequel relying on other films, it was just its own thing. So it had to be
Yeah, people
good, and
just
it told a new
love the original
story.
story.
Mm. Um, do I necessarily think it is the best of the originals? Probably, I do. I think it probably has fewer flaws than than Empire. In fact, I'm beginning work on a video actually fairly soon, hopefully, about Empire and sort of looking back at it as, is it actually as good as people remember? Or isn't it not? Don't get me wrong,
Yeah.
I love Empire. I think it's a fantastic film. It's still like in my top like three or so of Star Wars films. But I think it can
But
be,
people seem
yeah,
to
they
put it
they
on.
a pedestal above all of the rest. And I think a reason for that is often that it's these, original trilogy people who don't like George Lucas and the fact that it wasn't directed by George. They sort of go, oh, it's not directed by George, therefore it's the best. And I sort of want to
Yeah.
kind of challenge that stereotype a little bit.
I mean, those are the same people who, were singing AI's intro.
Yeah, exactly. Um, so yeah, well, that was a bit of a tangent, but an interesting one
Yeah.
nonetheless.
Yeah,
Um,
somewhat relative.
somewhere, yeah. So up next, okay, so we've got the sandstorm, which is why they obviously have to go and shelter with Anakin and his mother. Which I suppose you could say it's convenient that they have to go home with Anakin because of the sandstorm, which allows them to sort of get to know Anakin more. But then again, they're still waiting for the race, so they'd only go back to the ship and sleep, and then probably come back in the morning to meet with Anakin for his race. So it doesn't really change anything whether the storm is convenient or not.
Yeah. And then is this where Anakin's mom finally meets everyone?
Yes, I think so. Oh, and I do like their the house they live in, and I like that in the featurettes George was like they kind of wanted Anakin's bedroom to just kind of be like any 9-year-old kid's bedroom, but in the Star Wars universe, and it does
Yeah,
kind of work like that. It does sort of feel, although it's like a sandstone hut, in the desert, it does still feel very homely and lived in.
definitely.
And I like how Anakin's sort of like pulling Padme along, so like, oh, there's this. I've got a new friend. I want to show them all my stuff. As any like 9-year-old
Yeah, he's like,
kid would.
this stuff is so cool. I gotta show it off.
I mean, props to him. Building a protocol droid is a pretty big achievement for a 9-year-old.
Yeah, yeah. Well, yeah,
It is something to be proud of. I always like pausing on Anakin's home whenever I watch this film back, and just sort of looking at all the stuff in the background. Like even just then, I paused it there, and I didn't even notice he had like a little statue of a bug-eyed alien on his shelf and stuff. It's so good for rewatchability, this one, because there's always something new that you find that you never noticed before.
is this when R2 and 3PO meet?
Yeah, and again, we touched on it earlier about people think it's convenient that 3PO was built by Darth Vader. Essentially, that's weird. But if you follow it through from the start in chronological order, it just makes total sense.
It's kind of weird how people pick and choose how they watch the movies when it
Yeah.
fits their narrative. I mean, do you kind of know what I'm saying? Like sometimes if you make the argument that this should have been this way according to the original trilogy,
Mm.
yet when you watch it in chronological order, it makes complete sense and vice versa.
Yeah,
Sometimes people just switch it up.
I mean, it's kind of like I wish that the original trilogy had been made after, because there's a lot of stuff that in the prequels I feel, although some of it like almost retcons some of the original trilogy, but it's almost better, you know. I'd rather see the
Yeah,
story from the prequels than the originals, and how that would expand without knowing of the original trilogy, and that it might, because the prequels obviously it has to end up with the original trilogy. We know where it's
uh,
gonna have to
yeah.
go
Everything has
if
to
you
tie
already,
into it.
everything has to tie in. Whereas imagine we're starting with the prequels, we didn't have the original trilogy. Imagine the stories that could have been told. Like I'd have loved to have
It could
seen
have been
that.
immensely
Mm.
different. Yeah,
Yeah, it could have been hugely different, and I'd have really loved to have seen those stories take place. But that's one of the problems that you have with prequels in general, you know. And then we get 3PO wobbling about meeting R2, and it's just such a cute little introduction. I like the banter between them. Like 3PO just sort of introduces himself like he always does, and R2's like,
It,
"Hey, you're naked."
it's like my parts are showing.
Showing.
Yeah, yeah.
It'll go over most of the children's heads, but it's still a great little joke there. But it makes sense within the context as well. I think it's really a really well written in comedic line.
Once again, it's another example of like the perfectly placed, tasteful humor
Yeah.
that Star Wars is really good at.
Okay, and then we got the message from Naboo to the Queen um, about the Trade Federation.
It's a trick.
It's a trick. Send no reply. So there's nothing really other than like the what Obi-Wan assumes that gives us an indication of that. We can assume that he's probably, I don't know, being held at gunpoint, or he's been threatened that, if you don't tell the Queen this, we'll start, I don't know, executing people in the city or whatever. He's clearly under duress. And you can tell that from his acting.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You
When
can,
I have recently rewatched the movie, it's extremely obvious. You can tell
mm,
something's definitely off about him. It looks like he's biting his lower lip
yeah,
almost
he's sort of
to
like
try and
trying to
conceal.
gritting his teeth, sort of like, you must contact me. Um, yeah, you can definitely tell that there's something not right about it.
And then even me, I'm not a Jedi, and maybe it's
Mm.
just because I'm skeptical, but I would have thought the same thing as Obi-Wan,
Yeah,
that it's a
even
trick.
even yeah, even if the chap didn't sound or even look as if he was under duress, I would still be skeptical, because it's like the logical thing that you would assume it would be. Of course, it's going to be a trap. The Trade Federation are still there, it just makes sense. And I like the fact that Obi-Wan says all of this. Send no transmissions, don't talk to them, and of course Padme isn't here at this point, is she? She's still in Mos Espa, but then Padme's the one later who contacts or sees the message again from Bibble, because she wasn't there. She wasn't part of that conversation where Obi-Wan was like, "Oh, it's a trick. Send no reply." She didn't. She doesn't know that. Um, and of course, she'll probably recognize that when she opens it, but she's already done it by then.
And then is the next scene coming up? Darth Sidious talking to Maul.
I believe so. Yeah. Um, yeah, on Coruscant, and it's our first look at Coruscant as well, and it's a great establishing shot. And I think it was one of the few times in the Phantom Menace they actually used like proper matte paintings, which I think they didn't. I don't think they used matte paintings in the other two prequels. I can't remember off the top of my head, but I think it was one of the last times matte paintings were used in Star Wars.
I think in one of the featurettes on Geonosis, they
Mm.
might have used a few.
They might have used a few. I just can't remember off the top of my head. You're probably right. Um, I think they used a few on Naboo in this one as well, but I can't remember particularly with the other two prequels. I'd probably need to watch the featurettes again. So yeah, we then get Palpatine and Maul. So move against the Jedi first, then you can move against the Queen, and you'll have no problem. Which makes sense, take out the Jedi, they're your biggest threat, and then you should have no problem getting the Queen back, which is what he does. He goes for Qui-Gon first, so that's all makes sense. That's fine.
Oh, really quick, there is a deleted scene that I actually thought was really cool of Qui-Gon sensing the droid that Maul had sent out to find them.
Is that the
And
one in the desert? Is that the scene with the old woman again?
Yes, and he turns around quickly and cuts it in half, and
Mm.
it kind of gives context to why Anakin and Qui-Gon
Are
are
running.
running when we see them.
Yeah, because that was always weird to me when I used to watch the film back in the day, that they were sort of wandering around and then suddenly they were running towards the ship as if they were running from someone.
So
Um,
that's definitely a
so
valid criticism, I would
that
say,
I would
for
say that,
people who have a problem.
yeah, and I think it's a criticism that he did essentially cut that out. I think it would have been better to have that in, even if like, it could have been trimmed down slightly, but I still think like that scene in its essence should have been in the film. Qui-Gon senses droid. Deleted scene. 1, 2, 3. We've got, I think, about 5 or 6 problems so far that we've discovered in the first nearly 40 minutes of the movie, which is more actually than I had anticipated.
But like we said, a lot of these are debatable,
A lot of these
and
are
a
very
lot of them,
debatable. They can be explained. They're very minor problems. Um,
if we critique every single Star Wars movie to this degree, there would
you'll
definitely
obviously,
be
yeah,
just as many.
you'll definitely find huge lists of stuff like this. I mean, especially when I was watching Empire back in May for May the 4th, I was watching that, and almost like every major scene or sequence had huge problems with it, that nobody talks about because it's Empire. But that's kind of why I want to do this video eventually about it, and the fact that just a lot of it makes no sense plot wise. Um,
There's a lot of things on
yeah,
Bespin that
there's a lot there's a
specifically I
lot that's
noticed.
not explained at all, or even given like any reason for it to do. But here, most of our problems are not really to do with plot, to do with story. They're more to do with sort of execution of the scenes. Apart from maybe that deleted scene, yeah, most of them are sort of execution rather than actual writing.
Either way, the scene with Anakin and Qui-Gon running,
Yeah,
even though it looks completely out of context, I
yeah,
guess you could stretch and say, well, Qui-Gon sensed that the
yeah.
presence was
You
getting
could say, yeah,
stronger.
you could argue that, couldn't you? Which again is why it's not a huge um, problem, but it's still there nonetheless.